That's the best answer anyone could possibly give me. I love it. That's going to be my new answer when people ask me. And I've been saying sensational. Can I borrow it? Is that okay? I can give you credit. She's like, cut somebody open. They're not exactly. You're getting like the whole idea. Like, all right. Scratch it, girls. That's what I thought. Scratch it. She didn't see it. She took her card. Yeah, she's a junior. Sorry. There are only so many things I can do. Okay. Be mindful. I will be mindful. All right, but I'm going to ignore the camera, right? I'm assuming we're not rolling yet.
We got to start. There's like 20 people on.
Oh, there are 20 people on. Okay, Tammy, there are 20 people online waiting for us, so we need to start. All right. I didn't know there were 20. He just told me there were 20. We are getting ready for being mindful. All right, you want to start?
Hi, everyone. My name is Tammy Warshawski. I am Director of Advancement at Solomon Schechter. As you can tell, I don't have much of a voice, so I'm going to keep my remarks very brief. We are so happy to have so many people in this room, people who have not been back in the building for some 10 years, some 20 years. We have parents of alumni, we have grandparents and friends, and Lena's going to find out just how many people. But the reason why we wanted to have this event this evening was because Lena has brought such a mindful culture to our school, from our students to our faculty, and I also experienced Lena's wisdom and insight by participating in a 6-week session that she was doing for different cohorts, and I learned so much, and I wanted that session to continue. Lena chose at that time to come back to Schechter as head of school, so my loss was the gain of all of us, and I continue to learn from her. So I'm going to turn it over to her. She's going to introduce herself, and I just hope you enjoy and learn so much from the evening. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tammy. Good evening. I'm so excited to see that it just booted out. Hold on one second. That timing was interesting. Let me just see if I can get that back up. Here we go. Okay. Okay, wonderful. It is a pleasure to be with everyone this evening. I am so excited that on a cold evening, the idea of living mindful lives pulled people out into the cold and into our warm, nurturing environment here. To tell you a little bit about myself, I am a Schechter alum. I'm a graduate of the class of 1988. I met my husband here. He is also an alum. I always tell prospective families it does happen. You can meet your spouse here at Solomon Schechter. I am the proud parent of 2 alum. My daughter is a senior at Rochelle Zell Jewish High School, and my son is a freshman at Rochelle Zell as well. I started teaching here in 1997. I was a 3rd grade teacher for several years. I left for a couple of years to, as I tell people, I say, left to have babies and get my doctorate. And I came back a few years later to do some part-time curriculum work. That then turned into being the K-5 principal, which then turned into being the K-8 principal. And so I was a school administrator for about 10 years in the school. And I took about 18 months. I'm now calling it my sabbatical, although it wasn't my intention at the time. But I was honored to be asked to come back. And January 1st was my first day as head of school. So I'm coming up on my 1-year anniversary as head of school. And I'm very honored. Oh, thank you. Thank you. And it's truly my honor to serve this community in this capacity. Mindfulness is something that is very personal to me. It is very near and dear to me. I have been practicing mindfulness, which we'll talk about what exactly does that mean, for about 14 years. For me, it actually came out of a moment of personal crisis. My daughter, who is now a healthy, beautiful, wonderful senior in high school, when she was 3 years old, she had a brain tumor. And we found it emergency. It was, by the time we went to the doctor thinking maybe she needed glasses, it was less than 12 hours before we were at Children's Memorial Hospital and she was having major surgery. So, and I had a 7-month-old at home at the time. And I found all of my strength to get through that experience with the help of my friends and my family. And when we got home and we knew that she was going to be okay, I fell apart. And I was really emotionally dysregulated. I was really not okay. I found all of the strength to get through what I needed to get through, and then I wasn't quite sure what to do with myself. And one day, I really don't know why, because back then I knew nothing about mindfulness, I knew nothing about meditation. We'll talk about how those two words are connected. I just sat down on the floor of my bedroom one day and started to breathe, because I almost felt like I couldn't breathe, and I felt like I just need to breathe. And it was the first time that I had a tiny sliver of calm since we had gone into the hospital with her. And from that moment, I thought, okay, there's something here. And from that moment, I took every class I could take, I read every book I could read, and I really developed a personal practice. And I can say that my mindfulness practices are really what got me through that personal crisis. And I would also say it's what helps me in my personal and my professional life today. I don't think I could have been a school administrator for as long as I've been without these practices. I think I'm a better parent. I think I'm a better wife. I'm not perfect, but I think that these practices really have given me tools to be as effective as I can in my life. So I'm very passionate about bringing it to other people. We've done a lot of professional development here at school with the teachers. We've brought in different curricular materials, so we're doing a lot with our students from our youngest students all the way up through 8th grade, students being exposed to different practices. So I'm excited to be here tonight to introduce you to some ideas and some practices. I'm happy to share the slides afterwards. Tammy, do we have people's email addresses who signed up?
I believe so. We'll pass it around.
Okay, so if you want to make sure you get the slides, we'll make sure to note your name, and I'm happy to share, so you don't have to worry about jotting things down or missing anything. I'm happy to just share that information. So before we jump in, I would love to take a moment to just find out who's in the room, and we're going to just do it kind of globally. So I'd love for you to raise your hand if you are a current Schechter parent. So we have some current Schechter parents. If you are the parent of Schechter alum, a lot of Schechter alumni in the room. I can raise my hand on that one now too. Wonderful. Any current Schechter grandparents? Some of the same hands coming up. And I know we also have some Schechter faculty and staff that I want to recognize and have them. Any other connections to the school that I didn't name?
We're friends with Francine from.
Wonderful. Great. So Francine brought you in. Wonderful. Welcome. Yes?
I'm Francine's dad.
There you go. Francine, half the crowd is Francine's people. I love it. So the second question I have in figuring out who's in the room is, in this crowd, for how many people is mindfulness really a brand new idea, where you've heard the word but you really don't know what it is? Okay. So several people. And how many people already have mindfulness as a part of your life and you're just looking to learn a little bit more? And what's the alternative? Because not everybody raised their hand. How many people have a really serious mindfulness practice in their lives? Okay, great. We're gonna keep moving. Linda's saying maybe, sometimes, depends how things are going. Wonderful. So that gives us a sense of who's in the room. We're a diverse group in terms of what brings us here today, as well as what exposure and knowledge we have about mindfulness practices. One of the things that I'll add before I jump in is part of what I think is so important about the Schechter community is that we're not just a school for our students, that we really are an institution that supports our entire community. So I love to be here with you today. I did a similar workshop that was focused on mindful parenting several weeks ago, and we want to be supporting everyone to live our best possible lives. So I'm happy to be a part of that. Before we jump into the what and the how of mindfulness, I want to actually start with the why. Why should I care about this? Why should this be something that on a cold winter night I'm out at Schechter instead of home in my comfy pajamas? And the research is really tremendous in terms of answering the question of why. And when I first started with mindfulness and meditation, it was not something that was common. I didn't really tell a lot of people I was doing it because they thought I was weird, or they thought, oh, what are you, a Buddhist now? It just wasn't really understood. Whereas now you really can't open a newspaper or a magazine without there being something about mindfulness practices. The research has absolutely exploded in the last decade. And this is a summary of some of the benefits that you can experience when you integrate mindfulness practices into your life in a significant way. And I'm not going to read through all of them. You can take a look at them on your own, but I'm going to name a couple that have had a really big impact on me. The first I would say is decreased stress. That's been a huge benefit for me and a huge benefit for other people who I know have started their practice. I've had people actually say to me, you know, Lena, you have a really big job. You seem pretty calm most of the time. How do you do that? And my answer is always mindfulness practices. That we really have the ability to decrease our stress, and that these tools and strategies that I'm going to be talking about today can help decrease our stress. That's probably the most important one that I could highlight of all of them. But I would also say that I think in terms of what I have seen in our students, what I would highlight as probably some of the most impactful results of mindfulness practices, enhanced emotional regulation. Right? We've all had moments where our emotions kind of take over and something just comes out of our mouths because we're not regulated, we're not in a space where we can really be thoughtful about our response. That is something that I think is a tremendous benefit to mindfulness practice, and you can see the many others. Every person who I've worked with who has really taken this seriously and brought some practices into their lives feels some impact of the practice. And it can be very transformational. I was sharing with a few people at the beginning that I led a workshop last year, and someone attended, and a gentleman attended, and his wife came up to me this year and said, I have to thank you. And I said, why do you have to thank me? I don't know what I did. And she said, you really transformed my marriage. And I said, I'm not sure how I'm in your marriage, so let's talk about this because I'm not sure what's going on here. But her husband had attended the session and really taken some of the practices seriously and was beginning to see a lot of these results in his life and in his relationship. So I think the why is really important. So now we're going to jump into the what. So what is this thing called mindfulness? It's a buzzword. It's out there. What does it really mean? And then we'll get into how do we do it, right? Because that's really what we want to know. We want to know what it is, but really we want to know how do we do it. So I'm a believer that a picture is worth 1,000 words. This is one of my favorite pictures. I did not draw it. If you Google mindful, you'll see this image come up readily. So who can tell me, what do you see here? You can just call out. Oh, so cluttered on the left. Simplification, interesting. What else can you describe? If we look at the person on the left, we heard cluttered. What else can we say about the person on the left? Chaos. Unhappy. Unhappy. So there's actually a sad face, right? So there's some emotion that's represented there, and it's unhappy emotion. We've got clutter. We've got chaos. What else can we say about that person?
Urban mishmash.
Okay, yes, some city chaos happening there. Any other observations about that person? Yes?
They're not seeing the trees. They're not seeing what's in front of them.
Okay, so there's nothing in that thought bubble that represents the current moment experience, right? There's not a tree, there's not a sun, there's not another person, there's nothing from the present moment experience. What can we say about the person on the right, about that person's experience? Erica? Okay, focused on what's there. Clear-headed.
The moment.
In the moment.
Peaceful.
Okay, so we can interpret, right? So we can say that we think the person on the left is probably feeling chaotic and anxious. We're making a guess. We don't know for sure their emotions, although we do have a sad face there, so we know there's some negative emotion. And we're inferring that the person on the right is probably feeling peaceful. So one of the things that I find interesting about this picture is if I covered up the thought bubbles, would it be fair to say, if you looked at this picture without the thought bubbles, would it be fair to say these two people are having the same experience? If you couldn't see the thought bubbles and I showed you the picture, you would say, yeah, there are two people, they're outside, they're going for a walk, they're having the same experience. But now that we actually see their thought bubbles, are these two people having the same experience? Not at all. Not in any way are they having the same experience. One person is really present in the moment with what's happening, and one person is everywhere but the present moment in a very chaotic way. So this picture, we're going to go through an actual definition of mindfulness, but I'm a believer that images stick with us, and there are a couple of images I'll show you today because I think they're helpful, and I think this is an image that sticks with us. Usually when I teach this, someone in the crowd says, well, the person on the left is me. You know, there's usually someone in the room, and if you didn't say it out loud, I'm guessing it was in some of your minds, that some people really can identify with, man, I usually feel like the person on the left. That's usually how my mind is I was going to say organized, but not organized. So it's good to notice kind of what if anything, pinged you in terms of identification. I want to share a teaching. One of the things that I love about teaching mindfulness in a Jewish context is there are so many meaningful connections. I've taught mindfulness in a secular context. I've taught a 6-week course at a yoga studio where it's just purely secular mindfulness. But for me, there is so much more meaning when we can explore it within a Jewish context. And one of my favorite sayings of the Baal Shem Tov is this. It's a teaching of the Baal Shem Tov that wherever our thoughts may be, that is where we really are. So if we think about that from a spiritual perspective, you think about the picture that I showed you beforehand, spiritually, the person on the left was not actually with that other person. They were not having an experience with someone else. They were completely somewhere else. So this idea is wherever our thoughts may be, that's where we really are. And we tend to have our bodies in the present moment because we don't have a choice. Our bodies have to be in the present moment. But our mind is oftentimes in the past or in the present. Excuse me, in the past or in the future. So again, another graphic that I think really connects that if your body is present, but where's your mind? I'm going to guess that in the maybe, 6 minutes I've been talking, I don't know how long I've been talking, you've thought about your day, you've thought about what you need to do tomorrow, because we're human beings and because our minds are busy. So what's fascinating, this research really blew me away when I first learned it. Research out of Harvard University shows that almost half the time, almost 47% of the time, we are thinking about something other than what we're doing. I'm going to just pause on that fact for a moment. Almost half the time, we are thinking about something different than what we're doing. So consider for a moment what that means for the experience of what we're doing. Think about what it means about the quality of the work we might be doing. Think about what it means about the interpersonal exchanges that might be happening. If half the time I'm with you, I'm actually not with you. I'm thinking about something else completely. Now, the good news is that we can actually train our brains, and we can train ourselves to be more focused and to be more present. I want to share one other interesting quote from the Rambam before we get into the actual definition. And I actually, when I was teaching Tammy's cohort, the 6-week cohort, it was the first time that I had taught my 6-week course in a Jewish context. So I was looking for Jewish texts and Jewish connections to these ideas. And I was pretty blown away when I found this by the Rambam. We're talking about the 12th century. And the Rambam, otherwise known as Maimonides, in one of his writings said, most thoughts that cause distress, sorrow, sadness, or grief occur from one of two things. Either one thinks of the past, like the loss of money or a beloved one, or one thinks of something that may occur in the future, like a possible loss of injury, and fears their coming. So the Rambam in the 12th century was talking about mindfulness. And he was saying that most of our pain and suffering comes because we're not present in the moment. Because we're either rehashing what has already happened, or we're imagining, by the way, right, what might happen in the future. Right? What might happen. A lot of worry about what might happen. A lot of playing in our mind about what might happen in the future. So even in the Rambam was identifying so long ago the importance of being present. So I want to start, the definition I'm going to break into 3 subsections, and then we'll get into some of the strategies. So the first part of the definition is everything we've just been talking about, which is that at its essence, mindfulness is about being fully present with your moment-to-moment experiences. It means that if you are with someone, you are fully with someone. You're not checking your phone and texting. You're not doing a million different things. You are fully present. If you are choosing to do a task, you are fully doing that task. One of the things that when I became a principal, the culture before was that people could just come in the principal's office. Right? An open door policy, right? Isn't that great? Shouldn't all administrators have an open door policy? Very quickly I said, no, this is no good. This is no good at all, because what it means is I can never be fully present because somebody is always opening my door because they need something. And I said to my faculty, I wrote an email and I said, here's what's going to be. If my door is closed, you are not going to knock. You are not going to open it. If it's an emergency, you can come in. An emergency means you have to call 911. That's what an emergency means. Otherwise, you can leave a note on the board. You can send me an email. I promise I'll get back to you. But if you're the one in my office, don't you want my full attention? So part of this is about saying I have to set boundaries for myself so that I can be fully present. One of the things that drives me He said to me, well, now I just need to be stressed out about whether or not I get in. And I said, well, that's a choice. You could be stressed out for the next couple of months until you find out, but is it in your control now? Is anything about this process in your control now? No. I said, no, you worked really hard, you wrote great essays, you put together, that was all in your control and you worked hard. Now it's out of your control. So can we accept, with a nice deep breath, that your college admittance is now in someone else's hands? And can we move on? Because you've done everything you can do. as opposed to putting a lot of energy towards something that's out of my control. I will say that traffic is the best place to practice this. It is the best place, because if you're stuck because there's an accident up ahead, completely out of your hands, right? Completely out of your hands, nothing you can do, and whether or not you get yourself tied in knots while you're sitting in the car, that's up to you. Or can we take a deep breath and accept, okay, this just is what it is. This can be hard, which is why I spend a full hour on it, but I'll give you one more personal anecdote, which is that during the 18 months that I was not at Schechter, I was doing a lot of traveling, a lot of professional development, a lot of teaching across the country. And one day I took a cab early one morning to the airport, and I got out of the cab, and I arrived at the kiosk, and I realized that my cell phone fell out in the cab. And in that moment, right, I had a choice on how I was going to respond. It was out of my hands that the phone was gone. Now, in the end, my husband called the cab company and I got my phone back. But I didn't know in the moment that that was going to happen. But in that moment, I had to say, okay, well, this stinks. I'm not going to be happy about it. Accepting things as they are does not mean being falsely happy. I was not happy that I didn't have my phone. I was not happy I was going to get on an airplane without my phone. I was certainly not happy about it. But I accepted that it was what it was, and I thought about, well, what can I do? What's within my control? What's within my control is, okay, I need to call the person on the other end who is waiting for me to let them know I don't have my cell phone. Okay, well, every single person around me has a cell phone. So I can look for someone who looks friendly and not scary and say, excuse me, pardon me, could I just borrow your cell phone for a minute? Right? And that's exactly what I did. And I traveled without my phone, and I actually survived. Right? I found this graphic that I really, really love. It's from a book called One Step Ahead, Enhancing Your Performance at Work with Mindfulness, but I think that the graphic is relevant whether it's work or life. And the idea that he represents is that acceptance is the ability to refrain from making an already difficult situation more difficult. So the concept is, if there's a solution, why worry? Act. If you can actually do something, do something. Decide what you can do and do something. If you've done everything you can and you cannot create a solution, why worry? Accept. Can you imagine now why we spend a whole hour on this when in a longer class? Right? Worry is something that a lot of us do a lot. It takes up a lot of energy, and it really isn't productive in any way. It will never make a situation better. It will never solve a problem. It only creates chaos inside of us. Right? So it's not to say that we should never experience stress or worry, but it's about seeing it and noticing it and realizing that we have a choice in that moment. And that accepting things as they are and being aware again of what's in our control and what's not in our control is very, very powerful. And when we get to the how, I'm going to give you some tools for how to access that, right? Because it's a great idea, but how do I do that? So we're going to get to some tools. I'm just looking to, okay, I thought that you were giving me some direction. Okay. So the third part of the definition is that mindfulness involves paying attention in a particular way and cultivating awareness of physical sensations, thoughts occupying our minds, emotional arousals, our external environment. So it's basically helping us open up our eyes to our internal world and to our external world and noticing. We tend to ignore our bodies, right? We tend to, until the back is totally broken over, it was probably nudging us for a few weeks, but we didn't pay attention to it and didn't do anything. We also tend to think that we are our thoughts and we are our emotions. And part of mindfulness practices says, actually, you are the observer of your thoughts. And you are the observer of your emotions. So as soon as you can create a little bit of distance and notice, oh, there's that thought pattern again. Oh, there's that emotion again. You realize that you are not that emotion. One of the things when I teach this class more extensively is I like to talk about the shift from language such as I am angry to I'm experiencing anger. So it's real. We're not in denial, right? But it's almost like taking it out of ourselves and looking at it. Like, I'm experiencing anger right now. But it's separating yourself from the emotion and saying it's real and I'm experiencing it. But what tends to happen is the moment you identify it, it gets smaller. The moment you can step back and you see it, it actually loses some of its power because you realize that you are not it. You realize that you are actually observing it. Another graphic that I love from a book called Wheel of Awareness really showcases this idea that you are actually that center. You are awareness. And you can direct your awareness to different places. So you can direct your awareness to your 5 senses, right? Even just for a moment, even just, I'm cold, so this is good for me, but even just rubbing your hands together, how it feels, right? Just noticing the sensations, noticing your body, noticing what's happening in your body. And I can do a guided practice in a little bit to get a sense of that as well. But we can focus our awareness on our body. We can focus our awareness on bodily sensations. We can focus awareness on mental activity. So what's happening up here? What's going on internally? So just recognizing that we have an internal world that we can observe. And what's happening in the interconnection? What's happening in my relationships? What's happening in the external environment? So that's the third element of mindfulness. So we have being fully present, accepting our experiences as they are, and cultivating awareness of our internal and our external environments. That's the what. So now we get to the meat of the how. Okay, so these are great ideas, but how do we cultivate these? How do we bring them into our lives? And I want to actually start with some neuroscience. I'm going to take a quick drink. Hold on one second. So you don't have to remember the term experience-dependent neuroplasticity, but I do want you to remember the idea. And the idea is that neuroscientists used to believe that our brain structure was static. Your brain is your brain, and that's it. And what they now understand is that's not true, that our experiences actually change our brains. And I think it's helpful to some of the sayings, neurons that fire together, wire together. And the idea is that what you do, what we practice becomes stronger. It becomes more available to us. I like to think about it, if you imagine that it just snowed, you have 7 inches of snow in the backyard, and the first time you go out in the snow, you have to kind of trudge through the snow a bit. But the next person that goes, you kind of create a path, and each person that goes, all of a sudden there's a path, and it's really easy to go. So this idea that every time we do something in our lives, we are creating neural pathways, and every time we repeat, we are strengthening those neural pathways. So the more we do something, the more it's available to us, the more it just shows up for us. This is true for the negative things we do in our lives as well as for the positive. Right? So the negative self-talk and the negative habits that we have, the more we do that, guess what? The more they're just ready to float up and be available for us. So the idea in mindfulness is we want to practice, because the more we practice, the more it's available to us. When I taught the 6-week course a couple of years ago, I had a woman come in, it was the 4th week, and she came in really agitated. And I said, what's going on? She said, I can't find my breath. I can't find it. When I need it, I can't find it. And I said, okay, tell me what's going on. What are you doing to practice? And she said, I'm not practicing. And I said, oh, I found your problem. That's the problem. So these are great ideas. But the reality is, what I have found in my own experience and with others who I have worked with, is that if you don't practice, you're not going to see the benefit. And the reason you practice is so that it's available for you in the moment that you need it, right? It's available for you in the moment that you show up at the airport and your phone just fell out of your pocket and you don't have it. That's the moment you want to have it. But if you're not practicing, that moment might look very, very different because it's not available to you. So I want to start with the easy stuff, right? I want to start with informal practices, things that we can do throughout the course of our day, without having to carve out time for anything special. Just saying, okay, these are things we do anyways. How could I bring a mindful approach to my life? So here's some informal practices. The first one is to begin to bring attention to some autopilot habits. And what I like to recommend is choose one thing you do at least once every day. Could be brushing your teeth, could be walking up the stairs in your house, could be eating your bowl of oatmeal for breakfast, whatever it might be. But choose one thing and actually do it with awareness. I had one woman I worked with, she chose her bowl of oatmeal. She said it changed. Sometimes I'm just amazed at the power of these practices. You know, it almost just seems too good to be true. She said it changed everything. Because she used to be, you know, reading the newspaper and checking her email. She had 4 different things going on as she ate her oatmeal. And she said, now I just sit at my kitchen table and I eat my oatmeal. And I really feel the texture. And I think about where the oats came from. And I just eat my oatmeal. And it sets the stage for my day, and I'm fully present with that experience. So the first informal practice is find something that you know you do on autopilot and see if you can bring awareness and attention to it each time you do it. My advice is choose one thing. Don't leave and say, I'm going to become aware of everything I'm doing. I'm going to be the most mindful person ever. Because you won't be. Because you won't be. But if you choose one thing, you have far more likelihood of being successful in paying attention. Finding opportunities to tune into your body's experience. You know, as I said before, we tend to ignore our bodies. But even whether you're sitting in a meeting or you're sitting in the car, wherever you might be, just doing something, rolling your shoulders and just feeling your body, pulling yourself into your body and noticing what the experience is. A couple of weeks ago, my whole top back just went out on me. And I probably didn't pay as much attention to it, which is why I used it as the example, because even with all of my practice, I'm still not always mindful. But since it's been recovering, I'm trying to be much more mindful of just kind of paying attention. Is it stressed? Is it still tight? What's going on with it? No one has to notice you're doing that. Even sitting in a chair, just feeling your body against the chair, it pulls you into the moment. So again, why would I have you do that? To practice. Because every time you pull yourself into the present moment, you're strengthening the neural pathway of what it means to be present in the current moment. So it's not really about the moment of feeling your body. It's about that's a moment of practice that pulls you into the present experience. Eating mindfully, I gave you the oatmeal experience, right? We tend to wolf down our food, or we eat while we're doing 10 other things. My advice is have one meal a week. You're laughing, Linda. There's a story there. You're really laughing. My advice is try to have one meal a week mindfully. Just one meal where you're not doing anything else. You're just focusing on the food that you're eating. You're eating slowly. You're tasting it. Research shows we actually eat less and we eat more healthily when we eat mindfully, when that's a part of our practice. And we're eating, I mean, everyone is eating all of the time. I once taught this and a woman said, I don't have time. I can't even do one mindful meal. I said, okay, how about a cup of coffee? She was like, oh, okay, I'll try. I said, well, if you don't have time for a mindful cup of coffee, you need this practice more than anyone else I've ever met in my life. Because we should all have time for at least one mindful meal a week. One a day would be even better, but I know we're busy, so I'm not going to ask you to do that. Commuting mindfully, I gave you the example with the 7th graders. Look out the window, pay attention, take a different route. Get yourself out of autopilot, pay attention to what you're doing. Consciously shift from one task to another. And you can do this by taking a few deep breaths. This is something I do all the time. Nobody knows I'm doing it. And my office is right behind this wall. I can have 7 meetings in a day, going back to back to back to back to back to back. And I try to have a 10-minute break in between. Most of the time it doesn't happen. But I will always take 3 to 5 breaths to just kind of shift myself. Okay, I'm finishing one thing. I'm going to shift my attention to the next thing. As opposed to feeling like we're just in this constant stream of being bombarded and doing 10 things at a time. Do one thing and consciously shift when you start to do the next thing. Be mindful of priorities before changing course. So we tend to respond because people need us, right? So we might be in the middle of doing something very important, but we get a text because somebody needs us. So we stop what we're doing and we respond to the text. Sometimes we need to do that. I'd venture to say most of the time we probably don't. So asking ourselves, is that more important than what I'm doing in this moment? Can that wait 10 minutes? Can it wait an hour? How long can it wait? So being aware, as opposed to just responding to everything that comes our way, right? Because we're like ping pongs, right? Like back and forth, somebody needs me. Oh, okay, someone's at my door, someone's calling. So instead of just accepting that that's life, actually make a decision that maybe what I'm doing right now needs to be finished before the next person gets my attention or before the next task gets my attention. So these are informal practices, right? They're things in just going about our day that we can bring a mindful approach to. Heighten your focus when you're with other people. We're going to talk at the end about interpersonal relationships a bit more. But really be with the person you're with. Right? If you're out to lunch with a family friend, with a family or friend, there's actually a button on your phone, this might be in my practices, that's a do not disturb button. And we can survive if our phone is on do not disturb for a half hour or 45 minutes. So an informal practice is if you think about your day or your week, determine a time that you're going to say, okay, I'm going to eliminate distractions and I'm going to be fully present with this person. It could be personal, it could be professional, but really heighten your focus and awareness when you're with other people. So I talked about the pinball effect. One of the things that really transformed my practice as a school administrator is I started chunking my calendar and saying, okay, I'm going to spend an hour in classroom visits, and I'm going to spend an hour working or making phone calls or whatever I need to do. But instead of just feeling like we're constantly being pulled and we're spending 2 minutes on everything that we're doing, actually designating time to do something and diving deeply into that one thing, as opposed to being interrupted a million times. This is a big one for me. I haven't heard any phones buzzing, so I think everyone at least knows how to silence your phone, which is good. My phone does not notify me when I have emails that come in. I have to go into my email app to see if there are emails, right? Because otherwise it's that constant buzz. Ooh, something else is coming. Ooh, ooh, ooh. I would go crazy if all day long my phone were buzzing me with emails. So if you have your phone buzzing you every time an email comes in, maybe think about turning that notification off. And the email open, for those of you who spend a lot of time on your computer, right? We tend to leave that email tab open, right? Even when we're working on something else. Oh, and then we see the number change. So what happens when we see that number change? We go check the email. That might be really, really important. Okay, but then you totally pulled your attention away from what you're doing in the moment. And the research shows multitasking is a myth. It's just a myth. You cannot cognitively do 2 things at a time. You cannot. You are task shifting. And the research shows that you make more mistakes, that you are less efficient, and you are less productive. But the pull of that email and the number changing is so strong. So my advice is, and I take my advice most of the time, but not all the time, close the tab. And you determine for yourself how often you need to be checking your email. It depends on your life. You might be okay checking your email twice a day. You might say, oh my gosh, I would get fired if I only checked my email twice a day. Okay, maybe once an hour you have to check your email. I'm not going to tell you how often to check your email. My advice as an informal practice is don't have it open all of the time, because it's only going to pull you out of whatever your present moment experience is. And turning your phone on that do not disturb, the little moon button, is really nice. It is do not disturb. And what I always tell people is you can set it so that if the same number calls you twice within 2 minutes, it will allow it to go through. So I don't know, a couple of years ago, sent an email to all of my family, my parents, my in-laws, my sister, everyone, and I said, here's the deal. My phone's going to be on do not disturb most of the time. If it's truly an emergency, call twice. If not, leave a message. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And it's liberating when you can really do that. Okay. Any questions about informal practices before we move into some more formal practices? Do any of those, yes?
I have a question.
Yes.
Going back before informal practice, are you saying there is no value to worrying?
So I don't think I used the word value. I think I said, and if I did, I'm sorry, I think I used the word, it's not productive. It doesn't solve anything.
Is that different from value?
I don't know. I mean, so say more. Say more why that.
Well, mindfulness is almost like a sense of touch. If you pay, worrying is almost like a sense of touch. If you don't worry, you're not aware of what may cause you.
If you say that again, if you don't worry, you may not be aware of what might cause you to worry. So if you, in terms of a sense of touch, if you're in touch with what's happening around you and you care, you're going to worry because it's a way of being connected, and otherwise you won't. Am I hitting that right? So I think it's a really interesting idea, and it's part of why we usually spend an hour on it, because there's so much to talk about. I think there's a difference between being thoughtful about something and considering what's happening in the world and getting into a space of deep worry about it. And I don't think there's a very firm line. I think there's some blurriness there, but I certainly know people in my life who exist a lot of the time in a deep state of worry about what might be.
How about moderate worry?
I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. I'll take moderate worry over severe worry, right? And again, it's not about achieving some level of perfection of...
Why are we given the ability to worry?
I cannot answer that question.
I don't think animals worry.
I don't think animals worry. And I think we do have to be thoughtful, and I think we have to be compassionate, and we have to be connected to those around us. And it's hard, especially if we have someone in our lives who we love and we care about who's going through something difficult, which we all have experienced. It doesn't mean we don't care and love and feel their hurt, right? Because we want to be emotionally connected to them. But the extent to which we kind of pull out of our lives because we're in such a deep state of worry, that's what we're trying to be aware of. Worry moderately. Any other questions or comments before I move on? Okay. So informal practices are really things that we can do throughout the course of our day. It's just bringing a mindful approach to our lives. Meditation and mindfulness are often used as synonyms. They're not synonyms. Meditation is a way to practice being mindful. You can be mindful without meditation in your life, but I will tell you from my experience and from working with others, you can cultivate so much more mindfulness by bringing some amount of meditation into your life. It's a very powerful practice. And I always say there's an expression that I didn't make up myself, but I quote, I don't know who I'm quoting, is that you practice on the cushion for the sake of the time off the cushion, right? So that we meditate so that all of this presence is available to us in the rest of our lives. My daughter, who tends to be a feature in these conversations, she can tell when I'm not meditating. She will ask me, and she will say it kindly, but she will say, "Mom, have you meditated in the last few days?" Love ya. And every single time she's asked, the answer is, I haven't. Things have been really busy, or I was sick, or I had work commitment, who knows what my reasons are. But when that happens, it's such a powerful moment for me. Because it is just holding up a mirror to me in my life to say that my meditation practice makes me a better person. I'm less irritable, I am more patient, I am more present, period. So I practice because it helps me in my life. So I want to give you a taste of a formal practice. We'll do a little bit of a guided experience, and then I'll give you, if it's something that resonates for you, I'm going to give you some suggestions of ways to cultivate. But I want to, talk about breath meditation, which is really just kind of a fundamental practice. And again, I like my graphics because I think they help us remember and retain. This is also from the same book I quoted before. And the idea is that you start with your anatomy, you start with your body of just trying to find an alert position. Right? Meditation is not about relaxation. It's not about, I'm going to just chill out now. Right? You can take a nap and you can relax. That's great, but that's not what meditation is about. And the B is about your breath. So the idea is that your breath is your anchor. So for those of you who have been on a boat before, which I'm imagining is most of you, if you are on a boat and the boat is not anchored, the boat is going to move with the water, right? However busy the water is, the boat is going to go with it. But if the boat is anchored, it is literally anchored into the ground below the water, it will still move, but it's going to move less. So the idea is that we use our breath to anchor ourselves in the present moment, to try to keep our minds from wandering all over the place and to keep our emotions from wandering all over the place. So our focus is on our breath. I have an asterisk on the C. I find that people either love or hate this part of the practice. I personally don't use it, but some people like to count their breath. So on an inhale counting 1 and on an exhale counting 2. And the idea is to count to 10 and then to start over. But what typically happens is you get to whatever number you get to, and all of a sudden you're working on your grocery list and you say, oh my gosh, I have no number, I don't even know what number I was on, and then you go back to 1. So for some people, the counting is an additional anchor. It's like having 2 anchors in the ground, right? My breath is 1 anchor and the counting is another. For some people, it's a distraction. Now the D is distraction. We will become distracted in meditation because we have busy, busy minds. And the practice of our normal everyday life is go, 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 right? There's constant narration happening in there. So when we actually pause and try to focus on something other than our thoughts, it's not going to magically be that we have space to anchor ourselves in our breath. You're going to notice that there are distractions. But the idea is to practice bringing your attention back, right? It's this cycle of distraction, focus, distraction, focus. And an important concept of mindfulness practice is without judgment. So especially when we start to meditate, we get the sense of, this is really stupid, or I'm really bad at this, or when is this going to be over, or I'm never going to be able to do this, right? We judge ourselves, we judge the experience. So the idea is, let's put judgment aside for the moment, and let's just notice the experience. So if you're game, I'm going to guide just a very, very short practice to give you a taste. How many people in here meditate on a regular basis? How many people have ever meditated? Okay, so we have a lot of people who have dabbled in. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of a practice, and I'm going to guide you through. So I'm going to invite you to find a comfortable position, legs uncrossed, feet on the floor. You can have your back leaning on the chair if you'd like, or you can even move forward a little bit. But the idea is that you take your posture from this to this, right? You can imagine that I have a string and that I'm pulling the top. You don't want to be uncomfortably stiff like this. You should still be, relaxed but alert. Hands can just be on your lap. And I invite you to close your eyes. If you're not comfortable closing your eyes, just find a gazing point down on the ground. And I invite you to first just notice your breath. See where in your body you feel it. You may feel the air coming in and out of your nose. You may feel your chest rising and falling. So just take about 10 seconds or so to just notice your breath, your breathing. And we'll take a minute to 2 minutes, and your goal is to fully anchor yourself in your breath, which means attention on every inhale and every exhale. And when you become distracted, which you will, either by your internal experience or your external experience, just bring yourself back to your breath and see if you can anchor yourself. And we'll take a minute or so. And in the last 30 to 60 seconds, see if you can be so in tune with your breath that you actually notice the beginning, the middle, and the end of the inhale, and the beginning, the middle, and the end of the exhale. Just see if you can kind of turn up that awareness. And take 1 or 2 final breaths, just noticing your experience, and gently open up your eyes. So that was really, really short, but I'm curious if anyone wants to share an observation from their experience.
It is relaxing.
You felt relaxed.
All my mind kept going to the smells that were around me.
Yeah. So we can be distracted by it, right? And I don't know what that sound is, paper cutting. I was like, really? I'm trying to guide meditation here, right? But we're distracted by what's happening around us. It's hard to be in our insides when there are sounds and smells around us. And sometimes we can actually use sounds and smells to be the anchor, right? So that is another experience to say, I'm going to just be with the smells. But when you're trying to be with your breath and there are a lot of smells and sounds, it's hard. It can be distracting. Any other observations?
It's actually easier than I thought that it was going to be, considering how busy my mind has been today. But
So when you say easier, do you mean, what do you mean by easier?
the distractions were easier to push away
Okay.
than I thought. And that was kind of helping me. That was like a wave. It was like water, like a constant.
Great. Yes.
Is this a form of obsession?
A form of obsession?
Yeah.
Ask more, because I'm not trying to understand.
You're saying whenever we are sort of troubled, we should become more mindful and meditate.
That's not what I'm saying.
Meditate and become more mindful.
So I'm not saying meditate when you're upset. What I'm saying is, every morning I wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I exercise and I meditate. I don't meditate when I'm upset. I meditate because it changes my baseline. So what happens is that my ability to navigate when life gets hard is enhanced and increased because of my practice. So yes, once you have the practice, you might use the tool when you're upset, but the idea is to actually incorporate the tool into your daily life.
My concern is, does it become obsessive?
Look, anything can become obsessive.
Sure.
I think there's the possibility for anything to be.
And is that a problem if it becomes obsessive?
So I've never seen it become a problem with anyone. For me, it's self-care, right? So I am pretty committed to a daily practice because I'm better for it. So one might say I'm obsessed with making sure I have my practice every day, but I don't see a damage in it. Just like anything, someone can exercise to be too obsessive, and then it's unhealthy. So
your hair and be obsessed.
yeah, I mean, I think if someone decides, well, I'm going to go meditate for 5 hours a day, right? That I would say is obsessive, because the idea is you should be meditating so that you can function in your life. So I think it is about moderation. It's about finding what works for you. There's a really, really wonderful app that I make no money off of. I wish I did, because I've put so many people on this app, but it's called Headspace. And it's 10-minute guided meditations. The first dozen or so are free, and then there's a small fee if you want to subscribe. There's also an app called 10% Happier. Dan Harris, who's a journalist, wrote a book called 10% Happier that's all about why he meditates. And the reason he gives is, I'm 10% happier. That's the gist of the book. But the book is really about his journey into meditation and mindfulness practices. And he has an app as well. So Headspace and 10% Happier, they're great places to start. So what I would say is, I meditate for 20 minutes every morning. I don't think that's not getting in the way of my life. It's helping. But I've seen 10 minutes a day transform people's lives. It really can make a big difference. And I will say this, the research that I showed at the beginning, that research includes people who have some amount of formal practice in their lives. And so to say I love these ideas, but I'm not going to practice it all, I'm sure people can integrate some informal practices, but the formal practices really are valuable and important. Yes?
So when you do 10 minutes of meditation every day, are you being guided by something like a
So
video or just
I'm not at this point. I do 20 minutes in the morning, and at this point I'm not guided. So I sit, I have a really beautiful meditation space, and I sit for 20 minutes and I focus on my breath. And there are days that my mind is really distracted. And then I have to practice non-judgment, right? Because when I get, I'll get upset with myself, and then you say, no, so I have a busy mind today. Okay, today's mind is busy. We'll see what tomorrow's mind is. So I really do suggest if you're beginning of your practice that you do something guided. It's hard to just sit in silence at the beginning. So my advice, although you can certainly try it on your own, my advice is to start with something that guides you. And then some people fall in love with these apps and they do them for years because it really, really works for them. But you can decide, if the apps give you enough practice, they give you a taste of it, then you can certainly go ahead and practice on your own.
Would you just sit there for 20 minutes and focus on your breath?
I do.
The whole 20 minutes?
Yes. And I become distracted, and then I pull myself back into my breath because I'm a human being with a busy mind. So I don't sit for 20 minutes with no thoughts. I will also say that for me, meditation is the space of, I often get inspiration when I meditate. The key is I don't stop meditating. Some people say, well, I have to stop and write things down. I keep a notepad next to me so that when I'm done meditating, I can jot down anything that came up for me, but I don't stop my meditation. I really try as much as I can to be steady with those 20 minutes and to say, and the worst is when, especially in the summer, in an afternoon, I might sit down to do it because it's not regular school hours and the lawnmower starts outside. And you say, oh, okay, I'm just going to be with the experience. I'm going to be as present as I can. So for me, that's what I do.
Do you set a timer?
So I have a timer that goes off with chimes at the end of 20 minutes. So, we have phones, right? All of our phones have timers. So you can put your phone on Do Not Disturb, and then you can set the timer for 10 minutes so that you won't. And I'll tell you, actually, most days in the afternoon here at work, I meditate for 10 minutes. I let my assistant know for the next 10 minutes, don't bug me unless you're calling 911. I set my phone on Do Not Disturb, and I meditate for 10 minutes. And the days that I do that, my afternoons and evenings are completely different. Right? It's kind of like plugging myself in the wall for 10 minutes. It gives me that extra charge, and then it gives me energy and it gives me focus. So it's finding a practice that works for you. There are some meditation teachers who really say 45 minutes a day is what you need to be doing. Okay, it's not realistic for most people. And I've seen 10 minutes be transformative. So I'm not up here saying that I think anyone should be meditating for 45 minutes, although many people do it. I'm saying 10 minutes a day can make a really big difference in your life.
So I always think that worry is another way to talk about anxiety. Mm-hmm. So would you say, or am I confused on this, that mindfulness is a way to handle your anxiety?
It absolutely is. Absolutely. And there are many, many therapists who are integrating mindfulness practices into their work, particularly around anxiety. So I am not a therapist. I am not here to tell you how that happens, but it is absolutely something that is now mainstream in practice, and it absolutely helps you manage your anxiety, because if you can change your baseline to be in a calmer space, and you can notice if you can see your emotions, and we're going to talk about this again in a minute, but if you can see your emotions when they're small, you can notice them. You catch them before they get huge. So you can say, oh, I can see that worry. And you can catch it before it explodes into something really big. So it's definitely a tool for managing anxiety. Linda.
When you say catching it early, even in class, because of Lena, a lot of us do mindfulness or even meditation with our kids. It might only be 2 or 3 minutes, but sometimes they want to be the ones doing the talking, and we give them a chance. But if you catch the kids as you see you're about to lose them, and you take that moment to start the mindfulness or meditation exercise, even for 2 or 3 minutes, it's huge. It centers them. It just brings them back, and it's really, it's an amazing thing.
There's also, Jill Bolte Taylor is a neuroscientist who wrote a book called Stroke of Insight. She's a neuroscientist who had a stroke and then wrote a book about her recovery. It's really, really fascinating. And she talks about the science behind when an emotion comes up, the chemical reaction, everything that's happening in our body, that it actually only takes 90 seconds to let it pass if we let it pass. That if an intense emotion like anxiety or anger or jealousy or fill in the blank continues beyond, it's because we keep hitting the trigger button over and over and over again. But if we can see it and we can catch ourselves in it, we can actually let it pass. And I'm gonna hit on that in a little bit as well, so we can come back to the idea as well. I'm gonna keep us moving because I wanna make sure that we finish at 8:30. I wanna just share, because I think it's significant when we talk about this within a Jewish context. First of all, when we think about creation, When God created us, how did God create us? Through breath. He breathed life into us. So our beginning, our essence, was through breath. And one thing that I learned here from one of our teachers, Panina Mazur, who I always quote every time I teach this, I was so excited when she taught me. I never knew the Hebrew word for breath, which is neshima. Neshima and neshama, what does neshama mean? Soul. It means soul. So the only difference between neshama and neshima is yud, which represents what? God. I had a moment, right, when she taught me that. This idea that our real connection to God and to our soul is through our breath. It is that powerful. It is that powerful. So a quote from Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, after having a very short guided experience, we noticed that our mind is quite busy. And he said, the mind changes directions like the flight of a bird, and it takes a great deal of strength and wisdom to hunt that bird down. Right? So this idea that our minds are distracted, and we have to work hard to focus our minds, to practice. I want to take a shift now that I think hits on what you were talking a little bit too in terms of anxiety and stress. The American Psychological Association, and this is also stress, is a full hour when I teach my 6-week course, so we're going to get a little bit of a taste this evening. But their definition of acute stress really struck me when I saw it. Their definition is that acute stress comes from the demands and pressures of the recent past and anticipated demands and pressures of the near future. Would you mind closing these doors? Francine, would you mind closing these? Because now we've got the vacuum to distract us even more. It's good that the school is getting clean. All right, so if I put the definition of mindfulness up against the definition of acute stress, they're the complete opposite. Right? Mindfulness is about being fully present, and acute stress comes from the demands and pressures of the recent past and the near future. I took a class over a summer several years ago with a professor from Stanford University. It was probably the most depressing class I've ever taken. It was titled Stress in the Body. And this is a graphic I created from that class. And I think it's really important to pause here and to say that stress is not just about being unhappy. We are hurting ourselves when we are in a constant state of stress. And I'm not going to read this for you. You can take a look. But you can see that almost every single system of the body is impacted when we are in a state of chronic stress. Our immune system, our aging, everything is impacted. So the importance of having tools and strategies to reduce our stress is not just about being 10% happier, although wouldn't that be great if we were all 10% happier? It is actually about taking care of ourselves. And I want to talk for a minute about what this idea of chronic stress is, because many of us in today's society live in a state of chronic stress. And the idea is that we experience stress, and we actually have something that happens to our bodies called the stress response. And the stress response is very, very important. It actually comes from the reptilian part of our brain, and we need this. You think about being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, right? If you are being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, you need a lot of things to happen for your body because you need to be able to get out of there. So you need your respiration to go down. You need your blood pressure to go up. You need hormones to surge. So the stress, this is, you hear stories about, I lifted a car off my child, right? Because all of these things are happening. That's a really, really extreme level. So what happens is that our bodies don't really know the difference between being chased by a saber-toothed tiger and being really stressed because we're stuck in traffic. Now, there are degrees, of course, but the same physiological things are happening. And what happens for many people is they experience stress, by the way, externally or internally created. Right? I would imagine that most of us have had the experience of sitting in a very safe room where everything is fine and we're totally stressed out because of what's happening up here. Right? So stress is not just something that's happening around us or to us. It can be what we're generating. So even just sitting and thinking about something that happened to us that's stressful, it generates the stress response. So what happens is our body needs time to come down from a stress response. Think about a time that you might have experienced that adrenaline rush, right? Your body needs time to come down. But what happens in today's society is before our body and minds have totally recovered, we hit the next stressor. And we wind up in this cycle of chronic stress. So what's the result? We're exhausted, we're depressed, and we're sick. Right? We're really, really impacting ourselves. And it's interesting, the research shows we tend to think that it's the big things in life that stress us out. It's actually the daily grind, it's the little things every day that impact our health even more. It's that constant state of I wake up and I'm anxious. I wake up and I'm stressed because I'm thinking about everything I have to do. I'm thinking about everything that's going on, right? My body's getting tense even talking about it, right? I can feel it happening in my body, right? So this is this cycle. And part of what we want to do is we want to break the cycle of existing in a state of chronic stress. So what does that look like? Well, what it looks like is we're still going to experience stress because we're human beings living in the world. It's not about eliminating stress. But it's about having a mindful response, which we're going to talk about what that means. And then you might have some arousal, but it means that you're going to have quicker recovery. So picture me in the airport, right? When I noticed that my phone was missing, it was, if I would have clocked it, I bet it would have been about 90 seconds, right? I felt all of it come up, right? My face probably got red. I actually think I put my hand on the kiosk like this and closed my eyes because I couldn't believe it. But I could see it happening, and I let it pass, so I recovered quicker. So my body recovered quicker, and I was actually able to then solve the problem. Because what happens is the amygdala, which is the part of our brain that is our emotion center, and it's really it determines whether or not you're in danger. So what we want is that the amygdala says, okay, we're safe here, so I'm going to pass this stimulus onto my prefrontal cortex because that's where I can make decisions. The prefrontal cortex is what we need to problem solve, to analyze. But here's what happens. When we get in a state, there's actually a word called the amygdala hijack, right? It's where the amygdala says, we're in danger, everything needs to stop right now. Guess what? No access to the prefrontal cortex. You can't find solutions. So again, you can picture me in the airport. Right? If I would have just gotten lost in my emotions, I wouldn't have even been able to access the part of my brain that said, okay, call your husband, call the person on the other side, right? Because I would have just been a kind of a hysterical mess for a while before I could have accessed that solution. So the idea is we want to avoid the amygdala hijack, and we want to make sure that we can access that part of our brain. And the best quote that I have ever found to explain this is from Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl is a survivor of the Holocaust, psychologist. He wrote a beautiful book called Man's Search for Meaning. And I'm going to read this quote twice, slowly, because I think it is worth it. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. I'm going to read it again because I want us to sit with it. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Right? And if I go back, right, here's what he's talking about. Space. Do we have space or do we not have space? Right? We use the term when someone has a short fuse. Right? That means there's very little space between something happening and the response. Short fuse. Right? And what he's talking about here is there is actually space between what happens to us and how we respond to what happens to us. But here's why we're all here tonight. Because you have to be mindful to access the space. I would imagine that everyone in this room, including myself, can think back to a time where we could not access the space. And we responded in a way that was just visceral and instinctive, and afterwards we went, oh, I could have really handled that better. I said something I shouldn't have said, right? I let my emotions get the best of me. So this, to me, is such a powerful essence of why do we want to bring mindfulness into our lives. One breath can powerfully help you identify space, right? So something challenging is in front of you. You're not going to be able to say, I'm going to go meditate for 10 minutes, I'll be back. No, because you have something happening in front of you. But if you have the practice in your life, in that moment you can find One breath. And one breath gives you space to access choice in your response. And imagine if everyone had the ability to access that moment. All right, how would that change the world, really? How would it change our relationships? How would it change our dynamics if everyone had the ability, like a button, right? But this is really what we're trying to cultivate. We're trying to cultivate that the breath is available to you. And if we go back, excuse me, to the idea that the more we practice, the more it's available. It shows up. It's like magic. When you practice, it's like the breath is there in the exact moment that you need it. And that breath, or two or three, if you're lucky enough to be able to access that many, can really change how you respond to your environment. It can be very, very powerful. So I want to touch on one more thing, and then we'll see if there are any questions. But I think that how these practices can improve our interpersonal relationships is a critical question. Because whether we're thinking about personal relationships or professional relationships, the more mindful we can be, the more positive our relationships will be. No one is perfect. No one is mindful all of the time. We all have our moments of being distracted, of maybe not having as much space between stimulus and response. It's not about perfection, but it's about awareness. We were talking before about emotion. I love this quote from Aristotle. Anyone can become angry. That's easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, for the right purpose, and in the right way, that's not so easy. Right? Anger's easy. Any one of us can be triggered. But can we, and by the way, anger's important. Imagine if there were no anger in the world. Right? There are things that that we need to get angry about, that we need to take action about. But can we moderate it? Can we do it appropriately? Right? Thinking about parenting. Right? Can we be appropriately angry with our children? Right? Are we coming from a calm, centered space using a very stern voice because they need to know what just happened was not okay? Or are we emotionally unhinged because we're so upset about what just happened? Right? Emotionally unhinged is not mindful because we're letting our right? No space between stimulus and response. But if we can say, my child or my grandchild needs to hear a stern voice right now. So I'm going to be able to access a stern voice, but my insides are actually going to still be pretty calm. Another quote that I love is from Alan Greenspan. I know you think you understand what you thought I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. I love this quote, especially because it's not even about mindfulness. It's Alan Greenspan. Right? But this happens, right? We have conversations that kind of go like this. Right? It's like, are we having the same conversation? We are absolutely not having the same conversation. So if we can actually be more present with each other, and we can be meeting each other in our communication more, that is going to improve our relationships. And there are a few specific ways that I think are very connected to mindfulness practices that we can do that. And the first is, this is not a new idea, that we need to be active listeners. But again, it's countercultural today. It's really, really hard and rare to have a conversation with someone and for them to not be distracted by something that's going on, by a phone buzzing, by something happening. So can we actually remove distractions? Right? This goes back to what I said at the very beginning. Can we turn our phones off? Can we close a door? Can we just be with people? Right? Dinner time in my house, when I'm lucky enough that we're all home because I have 2 athletes, if that phone rang, any phone, 4 cell phones in the house and 1 landline, no one gets up from that table to answer a phone. Because the culture in my house is when we're having dinner together, we're having dinner together. Right? It's hard to change something like that if that's not your culture. But thinking about where in your life can you create some boundaries where you're getting rid of distractions and saying, let's just be together. By the way, Shabbat is the best possible way to do this, to be able to connect with each other. Even if you're not particularly observant, even if Shabbat in your home is not really that electricity is off and we're not, just even saying for a couple of hours, let's have all technology away and off. Let's play games. Let's do something together. Let's be together. Let's put the distractions aside. Observing speakers' signs and body language. You have to really pay attention to what's happening with the other person. And I'm going to share some data in a moment. And responding back to what you've understood, I find this fascinating because often what happens, especially if we're having a bit of a heated discussion, is you might be talking to me, but I'm not really listening because I'm preparing my response, right? As opposed to saying, okay, I want to listen. So that the next thing that comes out of my mouth reflects what I heard. I might build on it. I'm going to have more to say. But if I'm just busy preparing my rebuttal, so to speak, while you're talking, we're not actually talking. We're speaking. We're not in dialogue. So can we be so present that we're actually responding? I actually try to practice this even with my kids when I hear about their day. Can I reflect back something that shows that I heard what they just said? Right, so that I know, that they know and I know that I'm fully engaged and present in the conversation. In terms of the body language and the speaker signs, I find this data to be fascinating. So if a communicator is talking about his or her feelings or opinions, so this is not true if you're listening to a lecture or information. This is about feelings or thoughts. 55% of your understanding of that message is nonverbal. Gestures, posture, facial expressions, 55%. 38% vocal elements, pitch, tone, rate, volume. Only 7% comes from the actual words that come out of someone's mouth. Fascinating, right? I think about if you're flipping channels and you get to a soap opera in Japanese. I don't speak Japanese. You can actually pick up on a lot of what's happening in the context. Right? I haven't actually seen a Japanese soap opera. I don't know why that language came up. But you think about soap opera acting, right? There's a lot of gestures and expression. You can pick up on a theme of what's going on. It's part of why when I have supervisors who are observing teachers who are Israeli and Hebrew speakers and they're teaching Hebrew, I actually think you can do an observation of a teacher if you don't understand the language. There's a lot to observe in that classroom. Even if you don't understand the actual words, you know what's going on in the classroom. So this idea that the words alone, so what does that mean? If you're on the phone and looking through the mail and someone is talking to you, you're missing most of the communication that is happening. You are only getting 7% because all you are hearing are the words. So the importance of actually facing somebody, paying attention to their gestures. I had an experience where I was doing a coaching of someone who was a mentor. And she, as a mentor, had to videotape herself being a mentor. She was videotaped her mentor conversation with her mentee. And if the camera was over there, where our camera is, so that was the view, she was sitting here and the mentee was sitting next to her. And she was so busy on her computer taking notes. And she said something, and the mentee literally, was offended really by what she said. She missed it completely. She absolutely missed it. Of course, when she watched the video, she realized how much she missed it. But really being with someone so fully can change our dynamics. I want to see if there are any questions or comments on some of these last pieces that I brought up before we wrap. Yes.
You said something in the beginning, and I keep trying to remember what it is. I am present with this, but I forgot what you said in the beginning. It was something about taking something outside of you.
Yeah, as opposed to saying I'm angry, saying I'm experiencing anger.
Okay.
So this idea of I'm aware that something is happening inside of me right now, but I am not it. Right? We tend to think we are our emotions, so our whole experience is wrapped up in that emotion. And I'm angry, right? And we feel it in our bodies and in our, everything is tight. So this idea of, right, and even with worry, I'm experiencing worry. I can see that. It's real. It's because I care. It's because I love someone, but I can see it. So it's just practicing being an observer of your experience. And by the way, none of this can happen all of the time, right? I've said it a few times. This is not about moving through every moment of your day mindfully. I do not. But it's about trying to find the moments, trying to remind yourself, pull yourself in when you're in conversation, when you're having a tough situation. And it's about the practice that cultivates it. Yes?
I'm fascinated by this 7% people are getting from content. Is that not applicable, though, for like a college professor's?
It is not. It is only if they're talking about their feelings or their thoughts. It's not about the information. If you're trying to absorb information, that is not true. Because it's factual. It's about whether or not you're hearing the facts. But when someone is expressing themselves, There's so much that goes along, right? Think about how many facial expressions I've probably made in the last hour and a half, right? If someone actually analyzed my facial expressions, you probably, learn a lot. So it really is more about when someone is sharing their thoughts and their feelings.
And that would be really, currently, certainly, whatever side you're on, that would be a political conversation, that would be true of. Because a person's saying their opinion, which you may or may not agree with, it's not the content, it's their...
Yes. Yeah. Yes?
Meditation and mindfulness.
Mm-hmm. So meditation is a tool for practicing being mindful. So in my experience, personally and with others who I've worked with, you will be able to be more present and mindful if you practice through meditation. I know for myself, as I gave my example with my daughter knowing when I don't meditate, my baseline's different. When I'm in my meditation practice, and you guys can disagree if you'd like, those who work with me closely, I'm typically not irritable. I have a pretty even baseline. And when I'm out of my practice, I feel it. I just feel like my baseline notches up, right? It's harder to find the space between stimulus and response. It's just harder to be present. So again, you can be mindful without meditation, but I think that the power of meditation is so strong that I encourage you, if this is something that resonates for you, the meditation will get you further, faster. This is the best I can say. Yes?
I've done other breathing exercises, like my doctor gave me one for anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
in yoga, where they tell you to breathe in a certain number of counts,
Yes.
hold a certain number of counts, and let out a certain number of counts. Is that part of meditation?
It's part of mindfulness practice, because what you're doing is you're pulling yourself into awareness of body and breath. That's mindfulness. So all of those things, there are many, many different ways to do breath meditation and to pull yourself in. I gave you one really simple, basic example, but absolutely, because what you're doing is you are focusing very specifically on body and breath. Yoga is a great way to be in touch with body and breath, right? So, take a 60-minute, it's a mindfulness practice for 60 minutes of feeling your body, of being in touch with your breath, especially if it's something like a vinyasa yoga. So there are many different ways to tap in. So I want to wrap, because I'm aware we're at 8:31, and I want to close with one final quote from Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, excuse me. And what he said was that the one stone on which the entire building rests is the concept that God wants each person to complete himself, body and soul. This concept that we are actually partners in our creation, that God created us specifically incomplete, and that everything that we do to work on ourselves helps us complete ourselves. And I want to propose that mindfulness is one way. It's not the only way, but it is one way for us to really be completing ourselves and to be contributing to the world in meaningful ways, to be the best versions of ourselves. I think that's probably the best thing I can say about mindfulness practices for me, is I feel like it helps me exist in the world closer to my best self. I'm not sure I can say that I'm at my best self, but it helps me feel like I'm closer to my best self. And I think on a spiritual level as well, it really helps us to develop and to grow. And the more present we are with our experiences, the richer life can be. And I would also add that it wasn't until I started with mindfulness practices that blessings and brachot really had an elevated purpose in my life. And I realized that they're not for God. God doesn't need me to thank him for food. Right? But if I can say a bracha before I eat, that's a pause. That's a mindful moment for me to be grateful before I do something. So there are a lot of ways to use Jewish practice and observance. That can be, that's another whole class, which if people are interested, we can do. Yes?
So just your last comment, shlemut means completeness,
yes.
And shalom means peace.
Yes.
So that it's the same root, and
yes.
One comes from the other.
That's right. I think we can close with that. That's a beautiful close. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. I hope it was a valuable evening. And if you do want the slides, please make sure that I have your email. Even if you come up here and write down your name and email, I'm happy to. So the apps are not on the slides, but I can send them to you. Headspace and 10% Happier, but I can make sure if I send you the slides that I share. Lila.